Heyo everyone, Misha B. Barkin here. First off, thank you so much for 5.5k subs. I'm glad you subscribed and I hope you'll enjoy what I have to offer. Now, unfortunately I have to tap the sign and say that most of my viewers are people who aren't subscribed, so if you enjoyed today's video and want a free way to support the channel, then drop a sub. Or you can pledge to my coffee, no pressure though. Also, by the way, for those of you that are subscribed, what the hell is this? You guys are down horrendous, holy shit. No horny. Anyways, a phrase that gets thrown around sometimes when drama starts happening is, oh, this is just burned furs all over again. Now, it's oftentimes older furries who say this, or people who have been in the community for a big portion of their lives, but what do they mean? Considering the average age of most of my subscribers, you lot are likely in the same boat I am. I'm only 24. And I've only joined the community roughly 4 to 5 years ago, so I had no idea what people meant by this. I decided to look into it, and to be honest, it's an interesting piece of furry history. It's definitely a topic that can be relevant in today's community, considering the recent drama, so I'm not surprised people say it looks like a burn furs too. That's also why this video got pushed back to Friday. Research and script writing took a bit longer than I planned. Also, with the events being so far in the past, some of the info may be lost, outdated, or incorrect. I tried my best to be as accurate as possible, so sit down, everybody, while I tell you about the group that was known as the Burned Furs. So who were the Burned Furs? The Burned Furs were started around 1998 by someone named Squee Rat. Some sources also say that Eric Blumrich helped found the group as well. The group was founded after Squee was apparently rejected for a position from a potential employer due to apparently having furry art in their portfolio. This led Squee to analyze the community as a whole, I guess, and decide that the community was too fixated on the sexual aspects of furry. Now, I'll be the first to say that looking back at furry in the past, it does appear on the surface much more graphic. Furry conventions also seem to have almost exclusively adults, as minors weren't really in the community to the degree they are in the present. On one hand, I can see where they're coming from, but on the other hand, who cares, What people do behind closed doors and at conventions is their business. Unfortunately, the world's view was much more harsh and conservative as a whole back then, and something as awful as being a furry was likely scrutinized beyond belief. The world was much more focused on being normal and having yourself appear as such, and furries simply go against that grain, so they were harshly criticized. So I can't say that I'm surprised that a group arose trying to improve the public view of furries, as some still try to do today, but as you'll see, their views and goals were a bit misguided. According to the Burned Furs Wikifur article, throughout the manifesto, Squee Rat made clear that personal fetishes and unusual lifestyle choices were not a problem if kept as a private manner, in private areas and within the law. She opposed the public flaunting of what most would consider socially unacceptable behaviors. In particular, she derided the small minority of fans who insisted that a person could not be furry without, for example, having an animal spirit or practicing veganism. Alright, that's kind of out there. And straight from the old official website, their mission statement was this. Mission statement being that Anthropomorphic's fandom is being overrun by sexually dysfunctional, socially stunted, and creatively bankrupt hacks and pervs. And being that, one, over the past few years, Anthropomorphic fandom has come to have numerous alternative lifestyle groups associated with it, many of whom have little interest in the appreciation, promotion, and production of anthropomorphic art, stories, costumes, etc. Two, these groups engage in behaviors and activities that would be considered by non-members of anthropomorphic fandoms, and indeed, many members of the anthropomorphic fandoms, as socially embarrassing, having dubious moral or legal status. 3. The presence of these groups has caused a number of anthropomorphic artists to produce material to cater to their tastes, giving the entire genre an unfortunate reputation as yet another form of pornography. 4. Any call to these groups to alter their behavior to something more socially acceptable in a public forum has been repeatedly shouted down, being buried under labels such as elitist, fascist, and hate-mongerer. 5. Anthropomorphic enthusiasts that do not fit under those categories are being increasingly disenfranchised and are singled out as pariahs when they point out the fandom's problems. I don't know what that means. And also being that, 1. The above events have given the fans and producers of anthropomorphic art an image that is socially embarrassing at best and career-destroying at worst. 2. The hopes and dreams of success, even in modest independent fields, that many anthro artists and writers hold are in jeopardy because of the numerous problems with the fandom. It is proposed that, 1. We shall institute ourselves as a monkey wrench in the gears of mainstream fandom, not to destroy it, but to improve it. If all else fails, and improving the fandom seems impossible or a waste of time, then we shall institute ourselves as an alternative to mainstream fandom. Names for a movement such as this are currently under debate. 2. We strongly discourage the support of acts such as plushophilia, fursuit sex, and other things seen as wrong by non-fandom individuals, known by fans as mundanes. I guess that's like normies that we say today. They were called mundanes back then, alright. It will be easier for non-fans to sympathize and identify with anthro art if these elements are, if not eliminated, then pushed to the far outer fringes and rendered irrelevant to the fandom at large. 3. We leave the concept of furry lifestylers up to debate. It is generally stated that this facet of mainstream fandom is not a part of this counter-fandom, but the aspects of the lifestyler contingent are, while often laughable, not as problematical as the acts mentioned in point 2. 4. We encourage aesthetic, cultural, and philosophical diversity. While this may lead to potential intergroup conflict, it will also inspire much-needed debates and exchanges of ideas. So, essentially, furries remain pure. Anything that is lewd or suggestive in any way, banned. Obviously, I have to mention they were 100% right about discouraging bestiality, now more commonly known as zoophilia. But unfortunately, they threw in plushophilia and banging in the suits, and that kind of nerfed the impact of just how bad zoophilia is. Nowadays, we're much more clear about it. Zoophiles, off. They wanted to improve the community's standing with the outside world, and unfortunately, instead of being themselves and embracing the weirdness, they tried to sanitize the fandom to lower it to the world's standard. A lot of people use furry as an escape, even today, and a method to explore themselves and discover their sexual interests, gender, and much more. Now, of course, some people become furries and such just due to enjoying the art and the people, and that's 100% okay, but you need to respect other people's motives for joining the community as well. The sources I found says there was also hatred and criticism towards members of the LGBT community, but it doesn't really go into detail. Reading their official page from back in the day, they claim to not be homophobic, and it is true that there isn't any mention of homosexuality or bisexuality in the manifesto, which we will read later, but that's kind of like a company investigating its own allegations. We're not homophobes because we said so. I'm gonna take a stab and say that some of the people were homophobic and likely used this movement to hate on the LGBT community, so while the group's official statement says they weren't homophobic, odds are that they were. Not to mention a prominent member, Hangdog, made some pretty homophobic remarks, and instead of the other members calling him out on it and saying it was wrong and didn't follow the Burn Fur's mission, they made excuses for him. It's also worth mentioning that the world still viewed being gay as more of a sexual fetish than a sexuality at the time, and thus treated gay people awfully as a whole. I highly doubt that Burn Furs would speak against this, as if being gay was viewed as deviant, why would a group trying to purify the community support it? Now, on top of the mission statement was something known as the Burn Furs Manifesto. The manifesto, written by Squee, is a bit longer, so bear with me. Unlike the mission statement, I'm gonna interrupt the reading and give my thoughts on specific parts of the manifesto. This part of the video will be a bit more loose with editing and such, as I want to give my genuine and on-the-spot reactions and thoughts to the text, so enjoy. Or don't, I don't know. Originally I planned to read the whole thing, but it's a lot longer than I thought it was, and my reading comprehension skills have apparently gone out the window, so we're just gonna read bits and pieces of it. If you want to read the full thing, I'm gonna have all of the sources I use down in the description below. I remember when being a pervert was a bad thing. It still is, bud, don't worry. If you were warped, you tried to hide it, and good for you if you did. If you're going to polish your rod to autopsy photos or bugger a Shetland pony, you did it in the privacy of your own sick, sad home. Oh my god, what an opening statement. This is what's known as a logical fallacy. I don't remember which one, but basically you make a very exaggerated statement about whoever you disagree with so that they look really bad without disputing what they actually are. So basically they made this over-exaggerated statement saying, you know, oh, you're into this awful thing, when truthfully it's probably not even that bad. So now the person, they can just fight against the person being into this awful thing even though they might not be, you know. It's hard to explain, and it's been a while since I looked at the logical fallacies, but yeah. Live and let live is an excellent tree-hugging philosophy, but it doesn't do much when the ones who you refuse to kill are dragging you down with them. Holy shit. The ones we refuse to kill? Jesus. If you like animal-based stories, cartoons, or art, you're a furry. And like it or not, furry means pervert. This didn't come out of nowhere either. See, furry doesn't inherently mean pervert. Now, obviously, there are people that think that, but honestly, I don't give a shit what those people think. Also, just liking anime-based stories, cartoons, or art, that doesn't necessarily make you a furry. Hell, there's even artists that draw furry stuff that, you know, they themselves don't identify with being a furry, and that's absolutely okay. It's up to you in the long run, you know? The simple definition is probably what started furry fandom in the first place, but you would not believe some of the baggage the term furry has taken on. It's pretty sad, because, you know, it's not that deep. Honestly, it's just a hobby for most people. The most obvious one so far would be suspicions of This wouldn't be a problem if the furs that did it weren't so damn proud of it. This is, yeah, this is true. It's weird how much of an influx there's been on it recently with like zoo furs, where they use the Zeta symbol and they find each other and they're like, they just circle jerk each other the whole time about how okay it is, even though it's fucking not. This is still a relevant issue. Like, the things that Squee brings up, some of them are issues. Some of this text is, you know, spot on, but like a lot of it is just so off, or they make fallacies of people they disagree with. But this is one of the sections that I actually really agree with. For those of you that weren't out sick that day in sex ed class, don't f your pets. Fido is 100% bad idea. Yeah, see, this is another example of using an extreme example to try and summarize everyone you disagree with. Zoophile is a cute way of saying I violate animals for sexual gratification. Period. It's not okay, it never was okay, and declaring yourself furry doesn't give you the right to insist that any level of bestiality is a part of the furry experience. This is the most true statement in this entire text. I 1000% agree with this, and I hope that you all do too. This is just the most true part of it. I'm sure any sane person listening to this is gonna agree with this part, you know? It's not part of the experience, and it's unfortunate that people on the outside seem to think so. Getting your rocks off on lower orders of the animal kingdom is bad enough without your partner being licensed by Disney. I'm so into Nick Wilde, I can't speak about this, but getting called out by a manifesto from over 15 years ago. Nothing like it. Yes, indeedy, as we descend just a step deeper into hell, we stumble across the path of the plushophile. See, this is where you lose me. You listed bestiality first, which is absolutely fine. That's fucked up, and everyone agrees that we shouldn't, you know, that's not part of being a furry. And then you go and say that plushophile is worse or a lower step of hell? See, that's not right. As far as I know, that's just lasting rope on stuffed animals, right? Like that, it's definitely 100% on my thing, but that's not hurting anybody, right? Like, unless you're carpet sample, you're really not hurting anybody by that, right? So for them to list it second and be like, this is a lower step in hell, that's not right. Down we go. Oh look, the 7th level of furry hell, furry lifestylers. Now this part seems to talk a lot about believing you are actually an animal, which is actually not furry per se. You know, I don't believe I'm actually a dog, and a lot of the people who are furries don't actually believe they are that animal. If anything, we're cosplaying as it. This is more of a Therian or otherkin sort of deal. This next sentence. So somehow on the outside that kind of gets roped in with furry, but they are definitely different things. I want to make a video about it at some point. If you don't think you're the astrally projected soul of a wolf trapped in a human's body, or you don't answer the phone with a meow, you're not a furry. You know, I don't bark whenever someone comes to the door, so I guess I'm not a furry. Slightly less obstinate, but equally buttocks chafing. What the fuck? What? Are the random groups who tried their damnedest to superglue a witch's brew of lycanthropy, shamanism, and veganism to a once enjoyable subculture. I mean, I guess. I don't feel like this is an issue. I feel like this is one of the things where they're like, oh, by the way, this happens sometimes, so we should throw this in. I have never met a single person who has tried to, you know, group all of these things together. Like, sure, some furries believe in certain sections of this, and some of them might overlap, you know, but I've never run into people trying to force other people to follow these things, except veganism, I guess. There's that one guy online that, you know, and then there was that vegan teacher. I don't want to talk about vegans. Then there's the matter of spirit animals. Okay, yeah, spirit animals, I'm gonna put a meme up where it was like, stop asking people what their spirit animal is, you're white, just ask them what their persona is. That's kind of how I feel about that. I don't have one, I don't want one, I don't need one. And according to some, this disqualifies me as a furry. See, not every furry has their own sona, but their own sona is kind of like a bastardized version of a spirit animal. Obviously, it's a completely different thing. The spirit animal means much more to the cultures that believe in that than a simple fursona does. And not everybody has a fursona, and that's okay. The next phrase is about veganism, and I just really don't care. That's such a non-problem that they're spending an entire paragraph talking about. I'll show it on the screen if you want to pause it, and obviously the link will be in the bottom of the description, but man, who cares? And finally, we confront the long-held notion that furries secretly wish they were animals. This kind of plays into the otherkin or Therian. I've never met a furry that like genuinely wishes they were an animal. We joke about it all the time. We're like, oh, you know, wouldn't have to pay taxes, but no one really thinks that. A modest proposal. Oh, here we go. Furry fandom is an embarrassment. There's no getting around that, but that doesn't mean it's beyond repair. True. The community is definitely has its flaws, and, you know, I still feel a sense of embarrassment whenever I mention I'm a furry to people. But the biggest thing is, not very many people care, you know? It's not that big of a deal. There was a time when the designation furry didn't double for zoo plushophile, psychopath, or naturist. When? As far as I know, it's always kind of had a bad stigma. It used to be fun and people used to know exactly where you stood when you referred to yourself as a furry. I believe that this person just didn't see the negatives yet, you know, but these days people hate being called as much. They cringe at the thought of being lumped together with the platoons of perverts who have decided to set up base camp under the guise of furrydom. See, unfortunately, yeah, there's a lot of people who have declared that they are furries and there's really nothing you can do about it. As much as we talk about how zoophiles aren't furries, they can still identify as furries. We as a community can make them feel as uncomfortable as possible until they eventually drop the tag of furry, but there's ultimately nothing we can do about them identifying as it. A lot of cool people have dropped out of furriness altogether rather than be associated with or pressured by these nutballs. Some people just leave the fandom because they don't feel comfortable with being in the same group as these people, and I am in that boat. I don't feel comfortable if someone were to come out as like a zoo or something, someone I knew. I would not feel comfortable talking to them in the slightest. I would immediately cut them out of my lives. The community did it with Kiro, and fuck, we'll do it again. Even if by some miracle the masses rose up and managed to expel every last wacko from the fan base, the name furry has taken on connotations it will likely never shake. Yeah, over 15 years later, and some of these connotations are still there. Now, obviously, over time, furry has become, you know, shown to be in a better light, but some of these connotations are still there. People hear, oh, you're a furry, you must animals, you know. This is still a thing that gets said, and we're still trying to shake that. Like I said, I agree with some of the motives that Squee had. I don't agree with their methods. Common sense decrees a secession is in order. A subset needs forming. No, it doesn't. A group of furry types who want to make their interests known without being associated with the twitching crack babies and their crazed notions? Oh my god. I did a little brainstorming and I came up with this burned fur. Cringe. The name has a double meaning. Non-psycho furs can be called burned because anyone with a firm grasp on reality would clearly feel sighted by the screamingly deviant direction the fandom has taken. Another way of looking at it is the example made of furs who have spoken up against fandom perversion and have been burned at the stake for it. Eric Blumrich is the best example. Eric Blumrich was a piece of shit, and we'll see that later. Blumrich wasn't burned at the stake because he believed in purifying the fandom. He was burned at the stake because he was genuinely an asshole. Burned furs would be defined as furs who aren't insane. See, they take everyone they disagree with and throw them in a box of insanity for the smallest thing. So everyone gets grouped in together. They're doing the thing that they didn't want to happen to them. They're doing it to someone else. They're taking everyone they disagree with and throwing them in the same box as zoophiles. So essentially they've taken the problem and moved it somewhere else for someone else to deal with. Oh, you're into the NSFW side of furry? Well, that's the same box as zoophilia. So yeah, that was their manifesto. You know, overall opinions, it's held up on a pedestal, and the people that Squee doesn't agree with are shined in such an awful light that you have no choice but to side with Squee if you're on the outside looking in. You know, you don't want to sit there and be like, oh, well, I'm okay with zoophilia. You know, obviously I'm not, but like basically the moral dilemma that Squee is trying to put out is either you're on our side and agree that those people are bad, or you side with zoophiles. That's the moral dilemma they're trying to put out, and that's just not right. And like I said, I agree with some of the points made, but overall it's just not a good execution of it. Unsurprisingly, the rise of the burned furs caused an anti-burned fur group to arise, one of which was called the freezing furs, obviously a play on the burned furs being hot and ice is cold, and you get it. Their group existed as a direct counter to the burned furs and believed they were a hate group who were seeking to sanitize the fandom of the things that existed with it from the very beginning. They oftentimes shine the furs in a horrible light, which, don't get me wrong, the burned furs were not a good group, but they really overinflated what the burned furs were about. They claimed that the burned furs wanted to put a bullet in the head of every zoo plushophile, lifestyler, and anyone who is openly of an alternative sexuality, or anyone who doesn't believe their views are the wholesome truth. I can't find any evidence that they said this in the sources I searched, but it's entirely possible that this was said and just lost in time. The freezing furs both arose and fizzled out in 1999. Another group was Furry Peace, which actually started before freezing furs in 1998, and was much more focused on being a sort of third party or alternative to the two-sided debate currently going on within the community. Their stance was much more akin to what we go by in the community today, which is live and let live, you know? As long as you're not hurting anyone or anything, you're good. It doesn't say when that group ended, but I imagine like the freezing furs, it didn't last super long. Now, the burned furs ran into some conflicts and dramas when trying to execute and spread their ideologies and goals, to no one's surprise. I mean, they were trying to change a community full of many people, so it would be more shocking if they weren't met with criticism. It also didn't help how harsh and venomous their messages and websites were, almost said in a demeaning, degrading way, as we saw in the manifesto. Many of their conflicts took place online, not in person, and on old sites such as as you said, and no, I hadn't heard of it either. It was also rumored that they threatened violence towards those who didn't agree with them. The less harsh one is the maintainer of the Burned Furs homepage stating that he would put his fucking head through a wall if he ever met someone named Zydex at a convention. Another member named Goth Tiger pitched in and stated he would like nothing better in the world than to watch Mr. Too Many Consonants get what was coming to him, which, what? What does that even mean? Too many consonants? Is it because their name is spelled XYDEXX? I mean, okay. Anyways, threatening violence towards someone is not good, but over the internet, threatening to shove someone's head through a wall doesn't really mean a lot. Now, if they're local and could end up at the same con, then the con would definitely have to take initiative and ban them, but if they're far apart and don't attend anything together, this can kind of be filed away as an empty threat. Threatening to kill someone, however, yeah, don't do that. Eric Blumrich, you are a traitor and a ghoul, as well as a coward. The next time I see you, I will kill you with my bare hands. And you are not a human being. You're an animal. Without thought, without compassion, without mercy, without love. This was an email sent to Eric Blumrich, whom was mentioned before, and gives insight to the inner conflicts on the Burned Furs. Apparently people hated Blumrich, and this led to people leaving the group, as well as some leaving the fandom altogether. So with conflict within the group, and groups being specifically created to oppose Burned Furs, it's not a stretch to believe the community as a whole wasn't a fan of this group, and you'd be right. An example of this is when a convention known as Conference, not the one we currently have, but an older one, was taken over by Burned Fur member Daryl Exline, who made the mistake of stating it would become a Burned Fur convention. As the years went on, the con's attendance declined over time, leading to the con's closure on April 27th, 2003. Also important to note is cons overall saw a decline in attendance around this time, as well as the convention switching dates and venues, so it wasn't just the Burned Furs controversy that led to the closing of the con, but I imagine it definitely played a role. Ultimately, the Burned Furs group wasn't far behind in disbanding, as the group stopped being active in 2001. However, this isn't the last iteration we would see from the Burned Furs. In 2005, a new group arose, originally calling themselves Burned Furs 2, very creative, and would use the same logo as the original, despite being started by members unaffiliated with the original group. Started by the Reverend Ash Caro in November 22nd, the group has a similar view to Burned Furs, in which they hope to improve the group's public image. One major difference, however, was the group's target. This group targeted both Nazi furs and baby furs primarily, as opposed to a blanket disgust of all furs into smut. Now, obviously Nazi furs can fuck right off, but roping baby furs into it is kind of like when they tried to rope plushophilia into the mix. Their methods were different as well, as while the Burned Furs were more active in harassing those they didn't approve of, the new group hoped to inspire change from within by setting a good example. The group would change their name in January of 2007 to Improved Anthropomorphics to avoid any further confusion or drama. I can't find anything to suggest they disbanded, so it seems this group is still active today. I want to use this portion to give my thoughts on the matter. While I can understand the frustration that Squee must have felt to not get a job due to being a furry, I think it goes without saying that creating an entire group based on hate and sanitizing the fandom and harassing those who were into furry smut really wasn't the call. Furries as a whole are much more accepted and viewed as neutral or positive today than they were back in 1998, and Squee being denied the job due to a furry art in her profile is unfortunately not surprising. If Squee would have focused more on changing the public's view on furries from the outside in, rather than trying to sanitize the fandom, perhaps we'd be here talking about how positive of an impact the Burned Furs had on the community, but this just isn't the case. So, motive? Good. Execution? Bad. Real bad. In more recent days, the community is much more tame in terms of sexual or adult aspects. Now, obviously these aspects still do exist, but on a much lesser scale than they did way back when. It's important that these spaces exist, because as stated before, probably like 20 minutes ago, some people use the community to discover themselves, be it the sexuality, gender, or anything really. Trying to cleanse the community of these spaces wasn't the right thing to do, and still isn't, and harassing those you don't agree with also definitely doesn't help. The Burned Furs were created out of hate, and hate they did. Unfortunately, we still see groups and people trying to sanitize the community, with the most recent major example being covered in this video. So, my take on it. I think the community has settled down on the sexual aspects over time, and we are in a good place. People know that the sexual side exists, and that won't change. There's also a side of the community that is welcoming to everyone of all ages. This is no different than any other form of media, hobbies, or entertainment. Keeping this adult side and keeping furry weird is important to the community as a whole, and so long as you aren't harming anyone or anything, then by all means, be proud of who you are. Holy crap. This might be the longest video I've ever made, and I hope it's the longest I'll make for a while. I work alone on this channel when it comes to individual videos. This means that I'm in charge of script writing, recording, editing the audio and the stills, and just Jeez, I have a lot of work ahead of me. I wanted to make sure to get everything down and right, so I hope I was able to do that. I hope you enjoyed, as this was a ton of work. I hope that if people ask about the burned furs, people can come here and link this in order to fill more people in on this unfortunate but important part of the community's history, as we still see the repercussions and effects today. If you enjoyed, please consider pitching into my coffee, as I'm attempting to make YouTube my full-time gig, and any support helps. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!